Sure. I'm Alex Hanna. I'm a sociologist on the ethical AI team at Google. Um, yeah, I'll just leave it there. Um, should we go the slides up?
Yes, would you like us to put the slides up? Oh, you're welcome to open up your own, and if you want to walk through your own slides, that's fine as well.
Sure, I can walk through my own slides.
Okay.
Let me try to do this in. Okay, cool. So, yeah, so hi, Alex Hanna. So I'm going to talk about AI and gender today, basically the way that AI interacts with gender and the way that AI has done a lot, or the way it's used right now is potentially harmful for trans and gender non-conforming people. So I'm going to do quite a big survey here, and this is, not at all comprehensive, but the different ways in which AI researchers and practitioners have tried to classify gender. So they've done this in a number of ways. They've done this a few weeks ago. There was this app called Genderfi. I'm sure a lot of you saw of it, where you put in a name. In this case, the user here puts in the name Megan Smith. It classifies the name as female, and then they put a doctor in front of it, and it classifies them as male. So this was clearly lampooned, rightly so, for an instance in which this thing was misgendering. And by misgendering, we mean labeling someone with a gender they don't identify. And there was misgendering by name just by the insert of this, and it was set to work in a different language. People were putting in names of famous Black women, famous. I put in names of famous Egyptian women. It was roundly misgendering them. But we were making fun of this, but also Genderfi has around reporting was taken down, but this is done nearly universally. There's gender API. There's competition on Kaggle that is doing it with a basic naive Bayes classifier. There's a way of doing it with NLTK, and you can see, you can run the same query, you're going to come across the same thing. Basically, putting in these kinds of these names and doing some kind of gender classification. This is pervasive, the idea that you can go ahead and determine someone's gender identification based on some kind of external identifier. The same thing is constant in face and in facial recognition. In an article that was written by Morgan Showerman, who I've been working with lately, in a paper called "How Computers See Gender," what their team did is that they assessed 4 different commercial AI systems and looked into how their true positive and false positive rates fared across different images. And so they collected these images off Instagram with hashtag labels on people who were self-identifying. They got hashtags of man, woman, trans, but also non-binary categories. So 2 major things I want to highlight here. Not only do the gender classifiers here do much worse for trans people, about 90% for trans women and as low as 60% for trans men, but these things are nonsensical for non-binary people. People hashtag agender, hashtag genderqueer, hashtag non-binary. Okay, so these things themselves are trying to make some kind of an assessment of people based on their own image or their own presentation.
I'm sorry, Alex. Sorry to interrupt you. Did you want to move your slides? I don't want to interrupt you. Maybe did you want to talk to any specific slides in your presentation? Because we can only see your front, the main slide.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to catch that. Somebody just mentioned it.
I am moving them, and they're not going. So let's stop the share, and then oh, it says Firefox has a bug in this. Okay, how do I make this happen? I'm wondering, do you want to present the slides then, Mia, and then I can just ask you to advance them?
Yes, we are just working on that. We'll set it up right now.
Okay. We're all becoming annoying experts in the idiosyncrasies of multiple different video platforming services, which is an expertise none of us knew that we needed.
Exactly, right? Everybody has to now. It's become as basic as remember. I'm old enough to remember a time there were no iPhones. So here we are. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you.
Good.
So can you next slide after that. So yeah, this is the Genderfi app. We'll just pause for one iteration and then you see a doctor and it changes it to male. Okay, next slide. So, and this is the example of gender classifier name by name, many things here. Okay, next slide. And so this is the results from the paper. I'll spend a second on this again, just to highlight the table, looking at the columns in each of these that say TPR, in the ways that they have worse results for trans women and trans men, but also how it's nonsensical, and that's why there's these hyphens on agender, genderqueer, non-binary. Next slide. And so in a study that I think many of us are familiar with, Joy Bulamwini and my manager and colleague, Tuni Jabru, who's one of the co-leads of the team, of the ethical AI team, shows how these systems perform worse on people on people with darker skin. And so of darker skinned women, there was a biggest gap with lighter skin men, and they drew these from images of parliamentarians, and so ostensibly their genders are known. Next slide, please. We're also seeing this done in voice applications, so doing identifications of voice. This paper in particular, in this line of research, which was published at the Computer Vision and Pattern Recognition Conference, as well as the NeurIPS conference, is a line of research that tries to infer someone's face from their voice. So in this case, this line of research takes some kind of waveform and then reconstructs a face. And it is a form in which, one, there's two moves here that would be harmful for trans and gender nonconforming people. One in which making an assessment of someone's gender by their voice alone is not going to tell you what their gender is, and then making the second inference of reconstructing a face, which would then make some kind of assessment of their visual appearance based solely on their gender, which also has significant implications for someone who has an accent, is not from kind of a dominant race or nationality. Next slide. So this is less known research, but researchers are also doing work in which they're attempting to identify gender based on gait, as in people's walk. So there's two papers here, one on the left doing gait recognition and trying to identify this by their stride, and on the right, this kind of composite component we see, in which we have these kind of Bigfoot type individuals of their composite motion of what this the gait images are. Next slide, please. And many, many more. We're seeing gender classification from offline handwriting images, an automated hand x-ray based on gender classification and bone age assessment. In this paper, I found this very interesting and not to say, well, very much to say horrifying. They were taking an x-ray of someone's left hand and making a gender assessment based on that left hand alone, and then gender classification of walkers underfoot using underfoot accelerometer measurements. And so say you're in a shopping mall someplace and you're walking around, someone is trying to make an assessment of a gender, and this is the method proposed here. Next slide. So I want to take a step back, and I want to do this through the lens of a subversive project that was looking at this. A friend of mine, Dr. Juniper Simonis, they developed an R package called GenderEnder. The intent of GenderEnder was to flip the script on classification technologies, particularly named classification technologies. And so if for those of you who are not familiar with R script, you know, they imported the library first line, the function gender, then you can put in a name or a vector of names, and then the year, the name was, I think, assigned. And then in it, it issues an R warning. In this case, the first name, it says assigning a gender to someone else is an act of violence. And the second, assigning genders is inherently inaccurate. And in the third warning, consider the impact on individuals for whom your assumptions are wrong. So I really like this as a prism through which to discuss gender classification within AI research and practice, okay? Because it highlights these kinds of things in everything that is wrong and harmful with gender classification from things like names, faces, gait, left hands. Next slide. So a call to action from this. How do you think something like this would be used in a real life setting? Okay, that's something I first I want folks to sit with. How do you think gender classification is going to be used? Who will it hurt? Who will it help? Okay. Third question, how do technologies that classify and read gender intersect with race, class, religion, national origin, language, caste, ability, and neurotype? And lastly, how is it affecting those communities? Okay, so really situating this, and I'm seeing some things in the chat, incredibly on the nose here, where people are saying being used in policing, in credit, in housing, all these areas in which doing some kind of classification is going to be disproportionately harmful to particular groups of people. Next slide. So someone, a very intrepid Reddit user was saying, well, these are all the ways I've been asked about gender in a survey, and they used a D&D alignment chart for this. So, you know, you have everything from lawful good, where you have woman, man, non-binary, transgender, intersex, etc. Neutral good, which is don't ask for gender because who the fuck needs to know? And then chaotic good, where gender is just a blank thing, a blank box, and you can enter your own. Lawful neutral, true neutral, chaotic neutral. My favorite is chaotic neutral because the custom option allows you to upload a custom gender with a max file of 10 megabytes. And then lawful evil, which is often what we see most of the time. Neutral evil, where you have an option to be mutually exclusive with transgender, and then chaotic evil, where you get to identify as the nation of Venezuela. Next slide, please. And so sometimes this is the right answer. Don't ask for gender because who the fuck needs to know? We're actually trying to, you know, asking and really situating where gender is being used and how that's being used to harm trans and gender non-conforming people. Next slide, please. There's also been some excellent guidelines that have been proposed by some trans and gender non-conforming and allied HCI scholars, including Morgan Showerman, Kata Spiel, Oliver Hampson, Fuad Hamdi, and Stacey Bramman, with many contributors focusing on what it means to actually have gender equity, inclusivity in HCI, and what you would actually need to do. So this resource is one that I think is a really great starting point for this. If you plan to have some kind of gender classification or gender identification in your project, what would it mean? What do you need to know? Okay, next slide. And then I think the last point I want to end on is basically this thing, this call that has been issued very important terms lately, which is, you know, nothing about us without us, which comes from the disability rights movement. So focusing on building those technologies for those people. So building with communities like Queer in AI, which is a logo on the left, Black in AI at the top, Latinx in AI on the right, and women in machine learning on the bottom. Solidarity with these organizations and engagement with these organizations is one way, and a major way, of ensuring that any kind of technology you're building will have some input, but I want to expand that discussion, and I think there's been some discussion of this before. Okay, with that, thanks a lot, and I don't know if we have time left, but happy to chat and have a conversation.
Alex, thank you so much. This was a wonderful presentation, thought-provoking. I almost spit out my coffee. Who the F needs that? I completely agree. We would love to continue the conversation. We have space set up on Basecamp. So the way it works, we have general conversations space, but if folks want to have a private space and if they're able, speaker can make the time, we can set up another Basecamp just